Ngayong araw, August 2. The Philippine government and the European Commission have agreed to strengthen bilateral relations by sustaining the government's transition to a green economy through the Green Economy Program in the Philippines, or GEPP. A joint declaration on the Green Economy Program was also recently signed between both parties. And to give us more information on this, we are joined by Environment and Natural Resources Secretary Maria Antonia Yulo Loizaga. Good morning, Secretary Loizaga.
Good morning, Daphne. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with you where we're coming from at the DNR and the recent developments because of the visit of the EU Commission President. So as you all know, we signed a joint declaration for the Green Economy Program in the Philippines. Hindi naman po lihis sa kalaman natin na may problema po tayo in terms of our solid waste management and of course our transition towards renewable energy for climate change mitigation dito po sa Pilipinas. So apart from our concerns in terms of adaptation to climate change, in terms of disaster risk reduction, may isa pa pong side dito in terms of mitigation, no? So yung mitigation pong tinatawag natin in terms of the GEPP really comes from the management of our solid waste. We would like to move towards a more sustainable production and consumption of materials dito po sa atin, and this will take several steps, no? First of all, we need to create the policy environment for the transition to a green economy. At that will mean that we will look into, no, yung historically our solid waste ecological laws, no? And then also look at the EPR law ngayon and to see how we can make that relevant to our climate change mitigation purposes. So yung sustainable production consumption really has to do with the way we generate our products and how we also manage the waste that is part of the generation of the products, particularly itong mga plastic waste po natin. The policy environment, as I said, is andyan na. I can talk about the EPR a little bit later. But we need a whole of society approach. And that whole of society means that the private sector needs to be involved. Ang LGUs po ang frontline nito. Initially, pinag-usapan na siguro yung very highly urbanized areas. Of course, these are the big waste generators. But let me share with you some statistics that we have, no? In terms of yung solid waste po natin. The Philippines generates about 61,000 metric tons of solid waste daily, no? About up to 24% of this is, of course, our plastic waste. We consume and utilize actually over 160 million plastic sachet packets. Daily po yun. And of course, over 40 million shopping bags and thin film bags, no? So, lahat po ng mga plastic yon, sinisikapan po natin that they will not reach our marine areas and our coastal areas. Siyempre po, may kailangan pong gawin talaga in terms of the prevention of the solid waste such as these plastics to make it to our open environment and to our oceans. So, just to share with you po kung anong pangangailangan na dapat i-prioritize po natin, one of the issues regarding plastic waste is how much they can be reprocessed and repurposed, no? I don't want to use the word recycled, so medyo konting gasgas na po yung recycled, pero repurpose is one of those words na kailangan po nating isali dito po sa dialogue on solid waste management kasi po many of our plastic waste can actually be transformed for economic value. No, yung economic value po calculated by the World Bank, no? Only 70%, about 70% of the value of these plastics are lost. No, they could be repurposed, no, to the Philippine economy each year. And that value associated po with the 70% material value of the plastics can generate, by calculation of the World Bank, about 790 to 890 million US dollars po per year in order for us to generate that economic value, we do need to make some changes in terms of the way we collect, recover, and repurpose ito mga plastic waste na ito. So, here in the GEPP, yung sinabi po ni Ma'am Daphne, we're looking at, as I said, the policy environment. Meron tayong Extended Producer's Responsibility Law ngayon, which incidentally will have a big formal launch on August 4. And then secondly, the role of the LGUs, the role of the private sector, mga obliged enterprises, and of course, our innovations and entrepreneurs na kailangan pong isali po natin in terms of their contribution to how we can repurpose this waste, no, and looking also at this area, how we can shift towards renewable energy in terms of our production processes, no. So ito po yung sakop ng issue natin sa solid waste management na maapekto sana kung matutuloy po yung agreement nitong GAPP, no, na sinainan po natin during the visit of the EU President.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Loizaga. Any questions from Malacanang Press Corps? Job Manahan.
Hi, ma'am. Good morning. Dito po, ma'am.
Ay, di pa.
Okay po. Ma'am, you mentioned kanina na ayaw niyong gamitin yung term na recycling. But
Okay.
what are your thoughts on upcycling, ma'am?
Yes.
Sige, ma'am.
Yes, sa repurposing, sali na doon yung upcycling. In fact, no. So, in fact, yesterday, galing pa ako sa inauguration ng isang plastic packaging upcycling plant, no, sa Muntinlupa. Upcycling really finds new value for itong mga waste na ito. So they can be actually manufactured into building materials, for example, into furnitures, no, into other types of products na can suit our daily needs. So itong upcycling processes are very important, no, and not just the physical processing sana po of these particular plastic waste, but you also know that we can now, of course, repurpose, upcycle PET bottles into other types of PET bottles na will be more easily biodegradable once they go through a certain process, no. So that's why I use repurpose. Hindi lang po recycling, pero upcycling, at pwede din i-downcycle.
But ma'am, yung ibang mga processes na ito involves plastic melting, and we all know that plastic melting could somehow release toxins sa ating atmosphere. How are we regulating po yung mga smoke or any potential dangers that these pose? Kasi may mga studies, ma'am, that show that somehow yung mga workers yung affected ng plastic melting in the long run.
Sure. A very important po yung occupational safety for those that are part of these types of operations, no? In terms of emissions, potential for emissions, this is one of the considerations talaga po ng DENR in terms of regulation. So what we would like to do is, in fact, enhance what we call the continuous emissions monitoring system that we have for different manufacturing facilities, no? Sa ngayon po, we actually monitor what is being emitted by certain types of operations, including the power plants, of course, including cement manufacturing facilities. The small-scale processing ng mga plastics po, we still have to work very hard on monitoring these. These are not at the scale na pwede nilang i-afford yung monitoring system, and DENR is also not in the financial situation na pwede namin i-install sa kada outfit, no, kada facility ito mga air quality monitoring, but we are striving to actually enhance our air quality monitoring systems. Hopefully sa budget year na ito, we will be able to actually multiply, no, our monitoring systems. Just so you know, itong continuous emissions monitoring system ay live po ang feed sa EMB, no? So we have a room sa EMB, makikita nyo po doon yung live feed from the SEMS, and automatic po ang analysis ng mga emissions nito, and the notices of violation are also automatically released kapag nag-violate po ang isang standard. So yun po ang capacity na sana po we can get support for in greater amounts this year.
Is it safe to say, ma'am, that DNR is now promoting upcycling and veering away from the thought of recycling po? Lalo na't may support from the private sector.
I think that what's important is to realize the potential values, no, that can be made part of this whole solid waste management system. And those economic values can actually be redound, no, to those investors, those entrepreneurs, those innovators na have introduced new types of technologies to actually make new uses from this material. I also would like to stress at this point one of the important points that the DNR would like to advance, even though it is a social point. No, we have been moving for, under this new extended producer's responsibility law, the inclusion of our informal waste management sector into the formal system of solid waste management, which means our waste workers that are not formally employed, justly compensated, covered by occupational safety, and given social protection, as well as the fair wage for their contribution to the solid waste management industry, kasi industry na po siya ngayon. These should be made part of our implementation of the Extended Producer's Responsibility Law. So this is not just an environmental advocacy for the DNR, it's also a social advocacy.
Katrina Domingo, ABS-CBN.
Good morning, ma'am. We understand that the EU granted a 60 million euro aid for the Philippines to improve its circular economy, climate change, shift to renewable energy.
Yes.
But how does the government intend to utilize the fund? What projects are in the pipeline, or do you have in mind for us to utilize the 60 million grant?
So the 60 million grant is an offer by the EU, principally for the purpose that you just mentioned, no? The details of which still have to be worked out and defended at the NEDA ICCC, no? So we're in the process of actually putting the necessary documentation together. Perhaps to just point out that under the consideration of this grant would be the involvement of the local government. So initially po, we have identified about 10 LGUs that could potentially be part of this program for improving their circular economy locally, no? And of course, climate change mitigation because of the control of the methane releases from the management of the solid waste landfills. So those LGUs that were considered are the highly urbanized, no? So of course, Baguio City, Pasig, Quezon City is already well on the way. Caloocan po, Davao or Moc, the Garden City, Island City of Samal, dito sa Davao din, Metro Iloilo, no? And the islands of Palawan and Siargao. So just to emphasize, hindi po kompleto pa ang detalye at ang mga projects, but we have, of course, identified the potential LGUs because they are the front lines, no, of our solid waste management efforts in the country.
Follow up lang po. And based on your initial discussions with local government units, what seems to be the problem with the primary cause of concern when it comes to solid waste management? Is it on the collection side, or is it in the processing front?
I think it would be fair to say that each stage of the way is still a challenge, no, for us, especially to capture what would be part of both the formal and informal economic activities, no? So collection is, of course, a challenge. This involved logistics, but this involved also personnel who actually are able to collect and process properly in terms of the materials facilities that we have. Processing, as you know, sanitary landfills are among the main ways that these wastes are now disposed of, and monitoring the quality of the environment around the sanitary landfills is, of course, always a challenge, no? How the management processes are actually abided by in terms of the ecological soundness, no, of the practices. So we are still in need of some institutionalization, no, in terms of the way our solid waste are handled locally and consequently our national capacity. Yeah.
Last na po. Just the timetable. kailan po natin na-expect for the documentations and the NEDA study to be finalized? How soon can we feel the effects of the 60 million fund?
The NEDA approval process, of course, is one that it has to be contended with. No, we are targeting to have all our submissions ready, hopefully for assessment by the NEDA board by November, no, of this year. In the meantime, though, we are embarking on our own efforts to green our economy already, given that we have in place the legislation that we need, especially to oblige those large enterprises that actually are the main sources of plastic packaging, no? To begin their collection and to begin their proper disposal of their packaging products.
Okay. Ivan Mayrina, GMA 7.
This is on another topic, Secretary. I hope you don't mind.
Okay.
This is about the reclamation projects at Manila Bay.
Yes.
The United States Embassy expressed concerns about, and I quote, the potential negative, long-term, and irreversible impacts to the environment of such project. May we have the statement of the department on this?
Sure. As you may know, we have conducted 2 reclamation fora, no, and precisely in the last, the second one, the last one, we had a representative, in fact, from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to actually show us what they are doing in terms of best practice in this regard. No? As I've said from the beginning of my term, no, any disturbance to the ecology will bring about a disruption of systems. No? And so what the DNR is espousing and what we are about to do, and I've said this in public as well in the last 2 fora, we will be conducting a cumulative impact assessment of the reclamation projects as approved, so that we can demonstrate or illustrate and share what the cumulative impact of all of these projects would be on Manila Bay. You know that Manila Bay actually encompasses 3 regions. No, it's quite wide, and therefore the areas of NCR 4A all the way up to Bataan and Bulacan would be part of the consideration. There is a Manila Bay Sustainable Development Master Plan that was done in the previous administration. It hasn't been finalized. We are going to be using that as a reference to the baseline condition for the cumulative impact assessment. There are concerns not just expressed by the U.S. Embassy, but by others as well. Not just for the ecology of the possible impacts to the ecology, but also for the cultural and historical impacts of the changes that could take place given the history of Manila Bay.
Okay. Harley Valbuena.
Hi, Secretary. This is another topic po again. Kamustahin lang po namin yung status ng water resources natin under the monitoring of Water Resources Management Office since meron po tayong magkakasunod na typhoon.
Yeah, so we're now actually, I don't have the data as of today, but previously we'd already said that the rains from not this last super typhoon, but the previous one, would have extended our good water supply sa Angat for about 5 to 7 days. No? But given tuloy-tuloy po yung pag-ulan, I'm expecting today for an update as to whether we have breached the level at which we would be comfortable to say, okay po yung supply for Metro Manila and the Bulacan area. We just have to continuously monitor, no? At yun po yung gawain ng WRMO, one of the pieces of their work. Hindi lang po yun. We are looking now at working very closely with the DPWH in combining the purposes for flood control and impounding for the use during the times that we do not have these types of rainfall. So, multi-purpose na po sana yung flood control projects natin so that they can also serve as repositories, no, for storage for water whenever we need it. So, yun po, that takes a bit of work, engineering po yan, and of course, finding the proper funding for these types of projects. Fortunately po, may mga interesado po for PPP purposes, and government funding is also available. So, kailangan po i-redesign lang yung mga projects na yon.
Okay. Jean Mangalus.
Hi, Secretary. So the 2024 NEP currently proposes around 500 billion for climate change expenditures. Can the DENR give us an idea on what kind of projects this money will go to if approved by Congress?
Yes, you're referring to really what is called the convergence budget. No? So there is a climate tagging that takes place, and what we are very fortunate, I think, to actually be a part of is that climate tagging. So that involves the work of many different departments and their contributions to either adaptation or mitigation. So whether it involves the investments of the DPWH, whether it involves the DOTR, for example, in their design of their transportation infrastructure, whether it involves the SWD, for example, in the preparation for possibly the impacts of typhoons such as the one that we've had. We are very glad for that. In terms of the DNR's climate change agenda on its own, okay, as you may know, we now represent the President on the Climate Change Commission. And what we would like to be presenting very soon, and hopefully in time for the discussions and debates on the budget, would be the National Adaptation Plan. The National Adaptation Plan has really evolved over the number of years. It never has been finalized, but we are happy to say that this is now in the process of being completed. And that National Adaptation Plan will mention the different ways by which the investments in the NEP actually will realize positive values for us in terms of adaptation to climate change. I think what's also very important is to take note of our energy roadmap, because for us at this point, we would like to see the transitions, of course, that we all need to actually support in terms of the movement towards renewable energy sources. So for the DNR, in this case, we have worked very closely with the DOE to update the guidelines for offshore wind and for floating solar, and those investments would be components of the next year's NEP.
Okay, let's go. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I have a follow-up? The last time you were here, ma'am, follow up on Sir Ivan's question. How are the talks with the companies who are being probed for alleged non-compliance in Manila Bay development projects? Can we also know who these agencies are?
In fairness, what I'll be able to say is that they have been productive, to a sense that we have asked for the documentation support for their compliance. There will be challenges, I think, for some, given that some of the permits that they were given in the past administration came with certain conditions. And those conditions will have to be reconciled with the different agencies with whom they need to elicit a certificate of no objection from. So while on the surface, there may have been processes wherein no objection from certain agencies was elicited, we are now looking into actually the compliance of the conditionalities that were imposed in order for those certifications of no objection to actually be valid. Thanks.
Okay, we go back to Job Manahan, ABS-CBN Online.
Ma'am, you mentioned kanina na mayroong cumulative impact assessment na ginagawa. Kailan po ito matatapos, ma'am?
So as I mentioned in the last forum, we are now assembling the team that will be doing the cumulative impact assessment. So we've started to talk to the different scientists that will be part of that. Just to give you an idea, hindi lang po siya environmental science broadly, because it is involving a base system which leads to the ocean. We do need a physical oceanographer. We do need a chemical oceanographer. We need a fisheries expert. We need a biologist, marine biologist. We need certain types of engineers in terms of the evaluation of the potential infrastructure that will be introduced. So hindi po madali ang composition, no, ng cumulative impact assessment team. Previously, in the case of the Manila Bay Sustainable Development Master Plan, this was contracted out to a Filipino scientific team and a foreign team. We will be doing a predominantly Filipino scientific team with some technical assistance from some foreign experts, but this will be led by a Filipino scientific team.
Are you keen, ma'am, na ipasara or ipastop yung ibang reclamation projects kapag nakitaan ng violations dito sa, or siguro negative impact dito sa cumulative assessment?
I think what's important is reclamation has a certain value, obviously, in terms of the economy. However, we need to do the cost-benefit analysis in terms of the impact to the ecology and the longer-term impact in terms of possibly what could result from climate change. For example, sea level rise needs to be considered. The different possible geological events that could actually take place. As you know, there has been a lot of talk about the big one. No? The big one, of course, will generate some movement in the waters. However, ang sinasabi ko po ngayon, two things. The big one actually has a situation wherein Metro Manila will be separated into 4 segments. The coastal areas facing Manila Bay will be among those that will be part of the separations. And the rescue and the relief operations were meant to come by air and by sea. So reclamation projects could possibly have an impact on that plan. Sa inyo po, you can look up O-Plan Yakal Plus. Okay. Secondly po, in terms of sea level rise, all of these need to be taken into consideration in terms of scenarios for reclamation, as well as the subsidence that is ongoing because of the extraction of groundwater from the coastal areas of Manila Bay. So, additionally, I should say, on the geological hazards, no, so far, ang nakikita ko pa ngayon, in terms of the studies that I have looked at for the reclamation projects, is the reference to the 7.2 movement sa West Valley Fault. Meron po tayong tinatawag na Manila Trench. Ito po ay nandiyan po sa Manila Bay. That is the geological event that we should be looking at in terms of the generation of a potential tsunami. So, yun po, hindi ko pa nakikita po sa mga studies na sinubmit po ng mga proponents.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this ends our briefing today. Thank you, Secretary Loizaga, for the briefing on the Green Economy Program of the Philippines and also other environmental issues, including the potential impacts of the reclamation project. Thank you, Malacanang Press Corps.
Salamat
Good afternoon.
po. Thank you.